Hi, and welcome to the Skincarma Pod. I'm Carmine, the creator and voice of the Skincarma blog. With more than 25 years in beauty as a brand builder, copywriter, and skincare junkie, I'm putting my product wisdom and expertise to work, demystifying skincare. Today on the Skincarma Pod, I'm excited to welcome Roger Ignon, an industrial designer, inventor, patent holder, entrepreneur, and co-founder of the company behind the Hydrafacial, the pioneering skincare technology that revolutionized the aesthetics industry. If you've never experienced a hydrofacial, you're missing out. My first hydrofacial was at the Ritz-Carlton Spa in Rancho Mirage near Palm Springs, California. It must have been 10 years ago at this point. A good facial a few times a year can really boost your skin health. It gets deep into your pores to do what salicylic acid and niacinamide can't. Like a lot of people, I love booking a facial when I'm traveling. But out of probably a couple dozen facials in the past decade, I can recall just two. And one of them was in the jungles of Costa Rica. Of course, it's unforgettable. The other was that hydrofacial. I remember thinking at the time that the experience was a combination of a microdermabrasion treatment and what they do to power wash graffiti off the side of a building. It was breathtaking. With his background in industrial design and a raw passion for innovation, Roger Ignon played a pivotal role in developing the hydrodermabrasion technique, which combines cleansing, exfoliation, extraction, hydration, and antioxidant protection in a single non-invasive procedure. If you'd told me at the time that I would host the man behind the technology on my own podcast, I would have thought you were playing me. But life really is like that. There's serendipity around every corner, and that's what I want to talk about with Roger today. Recognizing seminal moments as they arise, seizing opportunity, and the power of innovation, of imagination, of questioning how and why things are done, and the luck and perseverance it takes to succeed. Let's do this. Let's talk to Roger. Roger, hi.
Good morning.
Good
Hello.
morning. Hi. I'm excited to have you on. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today.
Well, I'm excited about being on, so
Oh,
ask
wow,
away.
cool. Yes, sir. So first, I want to hear about where you got started, your personal journey, where you grew up, what inspired you as you were growing up. Did you want to be an inventor as a kid?
Well, I don't want to sound corny, but as a very young child, literally, I remember lying on the living room floor. I was all of about 6 years old, seeing the sun come through the window and these motes coming along. And at that time, I said, I really want to try to do something special. And I like the idea of inventing things. And I didn't even know what that meant. It was
Mm,
sort of a nebulous thought with uh, no really experience behind me at the ripe old age of 6 years old. But it did sort of plant something in the back of my mind.
yeah,
Later,
yeah.
people ask me about, well, where did you get your entrepreneurial bent? And
Mm,
it's corny, but to some degree, it's really quite true. Um, at the ripe old age of 7, I decided I wanted to open a lemonade stand. We live in the country at the crossroads of two, not major intersections, but intersections where there was a fair amount of traffic. And I set up my table, and my brother and I had a large pitcher of lemonade. And, I think at that time it might have been 5 cents a glass. Uh, and we were quite successful. People came by, I poured it, and I was thinking, gee, this is great. And then I'd send my little brother down the road to get some more uh, lemonade made that my mother would make up from a can of frozen lemonade,
yeah, we had that
not
too.
even fresh.
Yeah, the
And she'd
frozen
run
lemonade in the
the
can.
So then he'd run the pitcher up, and about 3 pitchers later, we finally shut down because my mother ran out of lemonade, and the sun was setting, and So I came home back down and announced to my mother I had maybe $5, not even $5 of money, but it was my money.
Yeah.
And well, no, it's not your money. The cost of lemonade is about half of that. So she took half of that. And then you have to pay your brother something. So she took another half. And so I was left with 25% of the pot.
Right.
And it did teach me some important things. First of all, you have to remember what gross profit is. You have to pay
Hmm.
for whatever you're selling,
Yeah.
and you take care of your employees. It was my brother. So anyway, that's a corny story, but the beginning of my entrepreneurial bent.
Right. That's how it started. I have a similar corny story. I loved watching soap operas when I was a kid. And, I
Uh-huh.
used to run home from school. I don't know, maybe 10 years old it started, and I would watch General Hospital at like 3 o'clock before anybody came home. And it was the only time I had peace and quiet, and the only time I was alone. My brother was still in school, and both my parents worked. And I would watch General Hospital, and I can't remember, maybe at the end of every episode there was an address where you could write into CBS Studios or whatever. And I wrote a letter to one of the actresses on the show, and I got a response. Like, she wrote me back. And it was the first time that I realized that I understood the power of writing, and that I don't
Yeah.
want to say manipulate, but I could elicit a response through writing. And that's when I realized that I wanted to be a writer. And again, I was super young, but a seed was planted, or something sparked in me, like in you. And so I
Well,
went
it is
on.
true.
What's that?
I think it is true that at a very young age, some seeds can be planted that start blooming later on.
Yeah, yeah. So I went on to study English and got my degree in English. And I understand you went to UCLA where you got your bachelor's in industrial design.
Yes. Hmm.
So that's really when your whole career was set. Yeah, it took off from there.
Yes. Before I was sort of dabbling in a lot of things and didn't really. I knew I had a creative uh, bent,
Hmm.
but also had sort of a practical bent.
Mm.
My father was an artist and struggled off and on. He became a teacher also. But I didn't want to go that far into the arts. And one day, my mother introduced me to a very famous industrial designer, Henry Dreyfuss, and I went to his office in Pasadena, and that's sort of where I really sort of fell in love with industrial design. And he was the chair of the department at UCLA. So everything sort of meshed from there.
Right. Again, another seminal moment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there are
S-
these moments where you're going along and boom, a light goes off for whatever reason, and that sets a course.
Yeah. So out of school, what did you get into first? Like, what was your first job, the first company you founded, the first project that you focused on?
Well, after I graduated from UCLA, I was like everybody else, um, scrambling to find a job. And I remember going to one interview, and I had my portfolio at UCLA. The major school competitor was Art Center, and of course, graduates of Art Center have beautiful portfolios. And I had this okay portfolio, but certainly not a stunning one. And I remember my first interview at a shop in industrial design shop in Pasadena, and it was the Keck. Craig's shop, and Mr. Keck interviewed me. Very nice gentleman. He let me go through my portfolio, and then at the end he said, "Well, Roger, I'm not going to hire you. I think you'll do very well, but I need somebody who can just draw nice pictures and make presentations for me." And so that was the frustration I had initially, but then I did land a weekend job that turned out to become a 5-year stunt with a office called Ron Luce and Associates, and we did a number of designs, mostly in the computer industry, because out here on the West Coast, commercial products were pretty much not done here, but technical products like the Apple phone and stuff, all that was done on the West Coast. So
Yeah.
I remember we did a project for Xerox. It was actually a company called SDS that had just been sold to Xerox. And we had spent the night, all night, literally all night, finishing up this large console that we loaded into the back of a trailer, and Ron Lucen drove it down, made the presentation. And he said, "Here, Roger, you stay in the office. We have this new air mover project. Can you start working on it and putting together your design ideas and so forth?" So I thought it was a hot shot, and I put together this model drawings and a model, and it was awful. I mean, even I was heartstruck when he said it was. He was such a kind person. He said, "Well, Roger, I think we have to do a little more work on this." You know, and a year or two later, I took a look at the drawings just in passing and rolled my eyes and went, "Oh my God, how did I have the nerve even to bring this up as a project?" So I blamed it on not having slept for 36 hours. So, you don't, at least for me, you don't have to start off strong. It takes some years of experience and maturing and being, I think, good at throwing ideas out. In other words, uh, not every idea you come up with has merit, even, let alone
Yeah.
being a good one. And sometimes you have to sleep on it, if you will. In this case, I only had to sleep on it for about 48 hours. Some of my subsequent ones, I had to sleep on them for a little longer to realize they were really not such a hot idea.
Right. So you said something that stuck with me, and I haven't forgotten. I probably never will forget. And it was that invention is never just one person. So again, I'm reluctant to refer to you as the inventor of the Hydrafacial or anything, because I really I really felt that. And can you go into that for me?
Yeah, I think there are different levels of invention and contribution to invention, I believe. And I think if you were to ask uh, most inventors, they would agree with you. Now, there are some that have come up with fantastic ideas, all of all on their own, but very rarely. So, what I mean by different levels of invention, there's the core level invention, where it's truly a unique way of looking at a problem. But in the journey to bring that invention to market, there are other sub inventions that go along with it. And to use a really broad example, would be I want to fly to the moon. Well, that's really not, you're not really an inventor. You just
Right.
had an idea, but so did probably 1,000 other people. I wanted to go to the moon. Um, and then somebody comes up with the idea of how to make a rocket fly. That's one kind of invention. And then what is the jet propulsion that you need to get there? And there are a myriad of other inventions that go along to make that a reality. And so that's what part of what I mean that it's a team effort. Uh, maybe I don't know enough about the history of Alexander Graham Bell, who had kind of a big ego. So maybe that's a bad example, or Edison. But still, there was input from his lab assistants, from other people that made those inventions reality. And of course, when you have a team, where do you make the cutoff on what's truly unique and what is more of a project, if you will, where you're doing 5 experiments uh, to separate out the viable from the not viable. And, you have a lab assistant. How many lab assistants do you include in the patent process? So what I tried to do is include people that were really contributing unique concepts to the original design. Um, that's that's what I mean by it's a team effort. The original concept is usually one, maybe 2 people sitting around, over a napkin kind of thing.
Right, right.
Or you do bright ideas do come to, especially if you're doing it a lot, come in the middle of the night. There's no question about it. But in the patent field, for instance, there's what called prerequisites, layers and layers of patents that were done, and then a new patent was developed after that.
Hmm.
And, I won't go into a lot of detail because it can be really boring. Uh, I like the discovery process and the qualification of this, the testing to make it happen, and that kind of thing. Writing patents, I leave to patent attorneys.
Right. And so we talked about the concept of luck, in our initial conversation, that not everything is executable, and a lot of ideas take a bit of luck to be executed. Can you talk about that a bit and your experience with that?
Yeah, luck sounds like it just came out of nowhere. It's usually
Right.
based on something before that floats to the surface, but you're right. There's luck and there's timing um,
Mm.
that goes along with it. I hate to admit it, but I've done some uh, projects that I thought were the greatest thing in the world, and they were the greatest flops in the world, where you design something, you think it's going to be great, and the rest of the world goes, I don't think so,
Right.
we're not
Yeah.
ready. Um, so, that's all part of the entrepreneurial part of design.
Yeah. That not everything hits.
Not everything hits, and sometimes it's not their time. In other words, it's a great idea, but it it for one reason or another it wasn't uh, ready. One design that I did a number of years ago and had patents on it was the battery powered candle, and we actually designed I had a software engineer help me to make the candle actually flicker like a uh, real candle.
Hmm.
And we got it down where you could barely tell the difference. And we had a battery pack that lasted a long, long time. And I tried to sell it to the restaurant business just as I forget which recession hit. I think it was before the turn of the century for sure. At any
Yeah.
rate, the idea was great. The fire departments loved it because they didn't like restaurants with having uh, fuel, real fuel candles, or real candles because of the fire danger
Yeah.
if somebody knocked a candle over. So they endorsed it. I had it was in Los Angeles. I got S.E. Reichoff to do the distribution, which was the biggest distributor for restaurant products at that time in the Southern California area. They're now, you know, across the nation. They tried to sell it, um, but a recession just hit. So restaurants were just trying. It was a steep recession. It was right after Clinton was out of office, and there was transition, and at any rate, there was a recession, and so the um, the restaurant industry was buying nothing other than food.
Hmm.
And even then, they were negotiating very hard. And I remember going to the Chicago, there's a show every year, huge restaurant show, really fun to go to. You get to taste all kinds of different foods and so forth. And we had a trade booth and we were trying to sell it. And all the restaurant guys said, you know, see me in 2 years. I think this is great because it saves me on the hassling with the fire department, and I don't have the costs of fuel oil and blah blah blah. But see me in 2 years. Well, we couldn't wait 2 years for
Right.
those people to come along. And then, lo and behold, now you see them. They're little Asian-made candles that flicker. They're throwaway type things, and they're used in a lot of restaurants now. So that's an invention that was before its time. So much as timing,
Yeah.
I'm mixing, I think, entrepreneurialism with uh, design and so forth, because when I worked in a design office, you know, we were doing custom designs for different companies, and we really didn't do invention. We did industrial design, which was working with engineers to make the product look better and also more serviceable and so forth. That's a little bit different. Out of some of those designs did come patented features.
Hmm.
Uh, that was entirely secondary.
So, are you still inventing? Are you still thinking up ideas every day? Things come to your head?
Not every day. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm 81, so they come every week. So uh, I'm, I'm just kidding. Um, Not so much, but I do have a little doodle book, and I do have several ideas. Um, but you know, it all gets down to a certain amount of energy. Um, the inventing process is not a easy product. I mean, it's one thing to just say, "Oh, I came up with a new paperclip," or what have you. I'm just using that as a
Yes.
simple,
Another
and
idea right
it is
here.
it's surprisingly hard to then bring it to fruition. I mean, the
Right.
first thing you have to do, if you're really serious about it, you have to do some patent searches to see whether there are existing patents that exist or existing patents that have uh, prior art, or what's called in the invention circles and patent circles, prior art. There's quite a lot of prior art in almost everything that you see,
Yeah.
and there are actually people that you can hire if you don't feel like doing it yourself that will do a patent search for you. Uh, and you have to describe what your patent is, and then they will do a search and give you depending on how deep a search, they will do that for you. can be very extensive or very, just top level.
That's through the USPTO, I assume, the Patent and Trademark
Mm-hmm.
Office. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, I deal with them all
yeah,
the time, trademarking product names.
yeah.
Sounds
Mm-hmm.
like a similar
Same,
process, right? Yeah.
yeah, and it's surprising. Even the search doesn't necessarily protect you
Hmm.
uh, because it's so extensive. Uh, Trademarks, for instance, people will trademark something and then it's used, but it's very low profile, or it's used in a different market, and so forth and so on. And so there's a lot of work that needs to go into that uh, process.
That's a fascinating world.
Yeah, and then there are also original patents, and there are dependent patents. And an example I use of that to illustrate that is, let's say you have a pen that you have patented. Somebody else comes along and makes a special eraser that's used with a pen
Hmm.
to erase ink or what have you. Well, the the dynamic here is the person who invented the eraser. This eraser is really dependent on the pencil patent. So to really go out and be able to market it without together with a pen, he has to go to the pen manufacturer or the holder of that patent and work something out, because his racer is really kind of dependent on the pen.
Wow.
Um, so so there are those kind of patents, and then there are patents that can be issued for one classification medical products, but
Mm.
uh, can't be used in oil refining.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
but there's a similar uh, design used in oil refining. I don't know that, but
Yeah.
I'm
You're just,
taking that as an example.
yeah.
Uh, so it's a it's an interesting world. So for somebody who's looking for patent attorneys, it's important to do a little bit of homework and do a little bit of questioning as to what their background and experience is.
Yeah, I had a little bit of that. I have my blog, and this podcast is called Skin Karma, and I trademarked I trademarked it. I trademarked the blog, and I pursued a trademark in that class 3 that we were talking about earlier for products. And there was a brand out of Phoenix, I think, that had skincare, and the brand was called Skin Karma, and it was 2 words, and karma was spelled with a K. And I'd pursued a single name mark with a C, Skin Karma, 1 word. And initially, the patent office rejected it. They said it would cause consumer confusion. And 3 years later, it worked out in my favor. I can't remember if if they went out of business. Something happened, but it was such a long process, and it was such a long process that I didn't even have interest in having a skincare brand by the time it was over.
By then,
Yeah, right. It's so ironic.
well, I think also, we're all human beings, and the examiners are human beings also, and
True.
they don't all necessarily see. There are rules of the game, and there are ways that they decide whether there's prior art or not, because they look up what the prior art. But
Yeah.
there's also a certain amount of interpretation that can change from one examiner to the other.
I think, that's a good point. If I remember correctly, the first examiner departed. at some point during the process. That's exactly what happened. And a new examiner came in and saw things differently, saw things the way I
Yeah,
saw things. But I think also
yeah,
that the company ended up going out of business. It was really, to your point, it was timing. And maybe if I had gotten that trademark sooner, I would have pursued skincare, and I'd probably be sitting here, you know, saying I can't talk much longer. I have to go sell product, which is not what I ever wanted to do. It was that
yeah,
the idea was more powerful than actually the execution of the idea or the end result of the
yeah. Well, I
um
think that's, go ahead.
common. You're going to say that's common.
Well, I think, there's a long road from the initial idea
Yeah,
to uh, to uh, to getting the product to market and then
yeah,
being successful with the product. And that can be a long germination process. That's why the you have a patent from the day it's recognized by the patent office. You have 20 years of patent protection. Well,
mm,
in most cases, not all, but it takes a, a large, especially if you're a startup with a new product, it takes a long time to get to a point where you're really starting to gain traction.
yeah,
Um, Certainly, a boatload of money helps you get there faster because you can spend more money on sales and marketing. But that isn't an assurance of success either. Frequently people with a boatload of money just spend it not judiciously.
hmm,
So it can take a long time. There are levels of acceptance. When somebody first hears a podcast like yours, where you were, let's say, featuring a product for the first time, you'll get some interest, some initial interest, but then you have to pursue that with more, and you have to spread the gospel over a bigger base, and it just takes more and more time and effort to get there. And I think an awful lot of entrepreneurs, and especially entrepreneurs, uh, are blinded by the beauty of their invention and just don't realize how long it takes to get there. A
yeah,
long time.
right. Sometimes ideas are best left as ideas.
Well, it just takes a long time for the public to first hear about it and then internalize it and realize that they want it, whoever you're marketing to. And it can take a long time to do that.
And a lot of perseverance,
Perseverance, stubbornness. Um,
stubbornness.
I, re- I remember when we first came out the Hydrafacial, and we came out with the Hydrafacial tower, and it wasn't. We came out in 2005, sort of mid 2005. Started introducing it. We still hadn't come up with the name Hydrafacial. It was Hydra, Derm, all kinds of stuff. But finally, we settled on Hydrafacial. It wasn't until 2010, 5 years later, I was at a trade show in Florida, and by then we had graduated to a bigger booth,
Hmm.
and it was a 10 by 10 booth, island booth. And people came into the booth and said, "Oh, the Hydrafacial, we need that because the guy down the street has one and is taking all of our business." Um, and it was at that point that I knew we had started to turn the corner. That we had at least gotten to the point where people recognized the name,
Yeah,
recognized the need, and were preparing to. They'd either just bought it or bought it at the show or were going to buy it,
yeah,
and the momentum started then.
yeah. And people like me were talking about it with their friends.
Yeah, yeah, but it took, wasn't instantaneous, and You just have to. We were lucky because we had other products we were selling. If we had started from scratch, excuse me, with nothing else, no infrastructure or anything, we probably would have either not made it or had to sell the product to somebody else, or just put a lot more money into it and hold on for dear life to get that that traction that you need.
Yeah, well, we're all grateful that you stuck with it, to be honest. It's the best facial I've ever had, of hundreds probably. Roger, I really appreciate this. Thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with me. You're so fascinating to me. I've loved talking to you. Our conversations have always, planted more seeds in my head, and really sparked something. And I know our listeners will really appreciate it. So thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you, Carmine. You have an excellent show, and I'm hoping that someday when you move out to the West Coast, if you do, look me up.
I absolutely will. I'm going to take you up on that offer, I swear. All right. Thanks so much,
Okay,
Roger.
great. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Skin Karma Pod. Find more insights, real talk, and reviews of my favorite skincare products on the Skin Karma blog at skinkarma.com. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and review this episode. It helps me to reach more listeners. Ciao.